Okay, so here we are on step 2, working on example number 10, one of the longest and most complicated arguments that we have. And our job in step 2 is first to do step 1 again. We will determine whether the following example constitutes an argument. Now, of course, we've already done step 1 on this example, so I'll just go ahead and cut and paste our answer from step 1. So we have, in fact, established this as an argument. We've backed that up. But now what I want to do is find the central claim that is serving as the conclusion of this argument, what the author wants me to accept if the argument is successful. Of course, we don't know yet whether the argument is successful, but we want to know what the author wants us to hold, if the author has managed to persuade us by means of good reason. And remember, we're going to paraphrase the conclusion. Sometimes the conclusion will be given to you right out there, with, as I like to think about it, big bright neon lights around it. But the author sometimes even says, I'm going to conclude. But most of the arguments we encounter in real life don't have the conclusion so clearly stated. So you want to get in the habit of becoming a good paraphraser. A paraphraser who's fair and accurate and honest. Really gets at the central idea that the author is trying to convince me of. Okay, and let me paste in our answer from step 1. We've established that this is an argument, and that the author is intending to convince the reader that a certain claim is true. So I already have a sort of first attempt at isolating the conclusion, which is that booing is sometimes acceptable. Now, I want to think about that. Let me try that out. Booing is sometimes acceptable. That's pretty close. I mean, clearly it's something that the author is trying to convince me that sometimes it's okay to boo. And the author is giving me lots of situations in which the author is saying it's okay, it's acceptable to boo. But there's something about that that's not quite narrow enough. I think that's not quite right, because the author is talking about a particular context where booing may or may not happen. So the author's not talking about booing in general. Every sentence, every situation that the author is talking about, every example, is about a sporting event. So this is really about booing at sports or at sporting events. Now, the author is talking about booing lots of different people, but always at sporting events. So even when the author, for example, is talking about politicians, the author's not saying it's okay to boo politicians at a dinner for heads of state or while they're giving the State of Union address. The author's talking about what you can and cannot do if you see a politician at a sporting event. So I want to change this to booing at sporting events is sometimes acceptable. That's a more accurate representation of what the author is trying to claim. So I like that better. That seems closer to the author's intention. I also like the fact that I put sometimes. I don't think the author is trying to convince us that booing is always acceptable, but the author is emphasizing under what conditions booing is acceptable. So I think that the scope of the conclusion that I've identified there matches the author's intentions well. So it's a really fair and accurate conclusion. So I think that's good. That's a good step 2.